Yesterday we started off by talking about the marine biome, and we learned that the marine biome is also the same thing as talking about the oceans. Now, the coral reef is in the marine biome. It's pretty much part of the ocean, but we do see it get put to the side every now and then as part of a separate biome. We're going to find the coral reefs in the ocean. I just want to mention to you about what they really are. When you see the coral reef, it is actually a living thing. It's made of tiny little animals called polyps, and they eat those algae that we talked about. Remember, those algae are extremely important in the oceans. They're a food source. They're a giant source of oxygen being produced in the entire world. Because those algae have to have sunlight to survive, coral reefs are typically found in shallow waters that are able to get a lot of sunlight. The deeper you go in the ocean, the darker it gets. So you're not going to find coral reefs. Well, I don't want to say you're not going to. I would be shocked to find coral reefs deep in the ocean, especially if they're living off the algae, because deep in the ocean it's dark and there's no way for them to go through photosynthesis. It could be a new type of coral reef, maybe. Who knows? Now we're going to step outside of the marine biome. And this is located very near the marine biome. And I would say this is one of the most important biomes we're going to study, mainly because it shows up on tests all the time. This is like, I think the test maker's favorite question is about this next biome. Estuaries. Estuaries. Estuaries are very, very important. They are where freshwater rivers, as you can kind of see here, meet the ocean. And you have this mixture of salt water and of fresh water. And we're going to call that brackish water. Brackish, B-R-A-C-K-I-S-H. Brackish water. Estuaries are extremely important. Many different species coexist in estuaries. Shellfish, marine animals, birds, different types of fish. As you can see here on the slide, it's sometimes called the nursery of the sea, and that's because a lot of the times ocean animals will move into the estuaries because it's not as open, and it's a little bit safer place to give birth in an estuary. Again, we're gonna mention this again. This is the second time I've mentioned this, and just like yesterday, when I start to mention something over and over and over and over again, you know that it is extremely important. An estuary is a body of water where fresh water and salt water mix. This mixture of salt water and fresh water is called brackish water. Brackish water. That will always show up on tests and quizzes and EOGs. It's definitely in there. And always questions about the estuaries. And typically it's about what type of water is there. Estuaries are located along the coast where freshwater rivers meet the saltwater oceans. You're typically going to find like swamps and beaches, maybe some coral reefs near an estuary. You may have actually been to an estuary before. There are plenty in North Carolina. Bays, sounds, harbors, and inlets are typical examples, but they don't always fit the category. Remember, if freshwater and saltwater aren't mixing, it's not an estuary. If it is mixing, then it is an estuary. Remember, that mixture is called brackish water. We need to think about this, though. Now we have animals that live in an area where fresh water and salt water mix. And this is extremely important because when it is high tide, when the oceans are coming in, that area is more salty. However, when the tide goes back out, the fresh water seems to push in a little bit more, and the area seems to have a little bit more fresh water to it. It's still brackish, but the amount of salt is changing. That is a key adaptation that a plant or an animal must make. They must adapt to the varying levels of salt. They have to be able to deal with lots of salt and lower amounts of salt in the water. And it's important that we understand that because those types of things are going to come up very, very often. When we're writing about the estuaries, you might want to write about some of the plant life, because we do have to talk about biotic factors. And part of that is the plant life. Seagrasses, mushrooms, there's plankton, seaweeds, and mangroves, which we will definitely get into. Mangroves, those are a type of tree that are able to filter out salt using their roots. And these plants provide animals with lots of nutrients, places to stay, food sources as well. Again, you see it again, so you know it's important. Where freshwater and saltwater mix, that type of water is called brackish water. Where the water from the river meets the sea is our estuary, and that estuary is brackish water. In an estuary, it wouldn't be surprising to find alligators, crabs, fish, herons, which is a type of bird, and ducks. Estuaries are home to unique plants and animals that have adapted to the brackish water. They have adapted to that mix of fresh water and salt water. Lobsters, clams, shellfish, raccoons, possums, skunks, reptiles, the river otter, maybe even Bigfoot, who knows? But I'm just joking. They enjoy the estuary, and they have adapted to that varying level of salt in an estuary. As we mentioned, we would talk about this plant in particular, and salt water will kill a plant. If we were to start pouring salt water on our plants in our room, they would all die. Mangrove trees have a fantastic adaptation. They are able to filter out 90+% of the salt that comes in their roots. Some of them, and there's a video about this that I can't wait to watch in class and for you to watch at home, says that they're able to actually excrete the salt through their leaves, and that the leaves taste salty if you lick them. Now, unfortunately, COVID stopped a lot of traveling, so I didn't get to go to the beaches and stuff, so I didn't get to go to any estuaries and find mangrove trees. But I can promise you, I am most definitely grabbing some leaves off of a mangrove tree, and I'm going to see if they are salty at all. I think that that's an amazing adaptation if that's true. It's almost like they're sweating, because I know that when people sweat, it's like salty. I don't know how they move all of this salt through them without it killing them, because it would kill most other plants. What an amazing adaptation. You can see these crazy looking roots. Right now they might be above the water. When the tide comes in, they're going to be below the water. And that's okay, because they have these, again, like these little snorkel roots called pneumatophores. And it allows them to cope with the flooding from the influx of the tides. Pretty amazing tree. For now, I want to leave off with these saltwater aquatic biomes, and we're going to now turn it over to the freshwater biomes. And we remember that freshwater biomes have fresh water, and that's very different than saltwater. Freshwater has little to no salt in it. I know it's really tough to see, and it won't let me stretch the screen out anymore right now. I'm not too sure why, but this is a fantastic introduction to the basics of freshwater from Crash Course. And if you haven't been able to tell already this year, I love Crash Course videos. They're not only entertaining, I think they're very well put together and extremely informative. And one of my favorite channels on YouTube. But let's start talking about some of these freshwater ecosystems. Now, again, we know that aquatic means having to do with water. Is a lake and a pond aquatic? Absolutely. Is it a saltwater or a marine biome? No, it is not. It is freshwater, and freshwater has little to no salt. I don't want you to run around and say, freshwater has no salt, because in the long run, that might not necessarily be true. If we were to go to like this random lake, there are going to be minerals in the lake, just small traces of them. It's not going to be like if you fall into the lake and the water gets in your mouth. It's the opposite of what happens if you fall into the ocean and water gets in your mouth. You're not going to taste salt. There's not enough in there to change that around for you. So again, you won't get that same yucky taste if you swallow the water in a lake or a pond, although I wouldn't recommend doing that. Just drinking straight out of a pond, you could get sick. Make sure you boil that water or whatever. But again, lakes and ponds have water that has very low levels of salt, less than 1%, and we call that fresh water. Fresh water. When we were talking about the oceans and the marine biome, and we were trying to describe the abiotic factors, the easiest was the water. It's salty. But now once we get into some of these other freshwater ecosystems and biomes, the biotic and abiotic factors really do start to change, and so we typically list those. And when we're doing our app through Glide, and when we're creating those things and we're writing in our Google Docs, we need to note those things as well. For example, in a lake, in a pond, what are my abiotic factors? Well, they're the exact same factors in every single ecosystem: water, sun, temperature, and soil. However, what's different about the water in a lake and a pond than it was in the marine biome? Well, number one, it's fresh water. What about sunlight? Well, honestly and truthfully, that changes. It varies. It depends on where you are. If you are far up north, the sunlight could be not as intense as if you were at a lake or a pond near the equator. What about the climate? Again, what's the season? Where are you located on the globe? It could vary. What about the soil? I need to know where I am. So these can change depending on where I'm located. The water in a lake and a pond, however, is always going to be fresh water. When I look at the biotic factors, what type of biotic factors am I going to find in a lake and a pond? Well, number one, you're going to find freshwater animals, and that might change a little bit depending on where we are on the earth. You're going to have insects, reptiles, freshwater fish, beavers, ducks, birds, frogs, cattails. We talked about those. Cattails grow in freshwater ecosystems. You will find algae. Is this the same algae that we found in the oceans and the marine biomes? No, it is not, but you're still going to find algae. You're going to find water lilies. So we need to remember that lakes and ponds have their own set of biotic and abiotic factors that make them very unique and make them completely different from ocean or marine biomes. Rivers and streams. Again, it's aquatic because it has to do with water. What type of water is in a river and a stream? Fresh water. What about the abiotic factors? Well, you've got sun, soil, climate, and what am I missing? Sun, soil, climate, and water. Fresh water. Biotic factors. You could have trout, other types of fish, reptiles, river otters, turtles, plants, more algae, and a plant called ferns, which you find very often along the banks of rivers and streams. And we'll look at ferns a little closer here in a moment. What adaptation do you need to live in a river and a stream? Well, you need to be able to live in fresh water. No clownfish, no sea anemones in a river and stream, no sharks for the most part. I know we can get into bull sharks. They do get into rivers upstream some, but you're not going to find a great white swimming up and down the rivers and streams, all right? Because it has not adapted to live in that area. Skip over some of these videos that you can watch at home. Here's a fern. You've probably seen these before. A fern is a group of plants. You don't need to know that they were produced by spores. You don't need to know that they differ from mosses by being vascular. What you need to know is this very last sentence, okay? That's just fun facts about ferns. You find ferns along the banks of a river. They need a lot of fresh water to survive, and they grow very well along the banks of a river. You're probably going to see a question about that. I don't know, maybe. Who knows? I only make the test, right? So I'm just letting you know that ferns pop up very often. When you get a chance, there's a video about ferns here. Awesome Bill Nye video about wetlands. Swamps. Swamps like the ones in Florida, wooded trees and shrubs everywhere. Swamps have trees. Remember that. Swamps have trees. And I think, honestly, I'm going to stop here. I'm going to pick back up with swamps and some other things later on because I know we're going to run out of time if I don't. So we'll come back. We'll start back with swamps next time. Smash the like button and subscribe.